What's going on, guys? Welcome into the Fantasy Slant, which is powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I am your host, Mike Tagliere. Alongside of me, I have my co-host, Kevin Cole. You could follow both of us on Twitter. I am at Mike Tagliere NFL, and then we have Kevin at Cole_Kev. We are here with you today. We're going to be covering every single game on the Week 4 slate for the NFL season. And we want to tell you who to start, who to sit. We're going to do exactly what we did last week. We're going to go through each and every matchup, touch on the players that you might be debating whether or not you're putting in your fantasy lineup, what you're not putting in your lineup. For those of you that haven't watched this on YouTube yet, you might notice that I have a few more gray hairs in my beard, and Kevin's hair is getting a little bit more out of control as we get further into the season. It's kind of wacky, isn't it, Kevin? I mean, we're sitting here and going into Week 4, Andy Dalton, Carson Palmer, our top 5 quarterbacks, Travis Benjamin's a top 5 receiver. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it always shakes out this way. I mean, there's a couple of different things. Obviously, it's a little small sample size already early in the season, but someone like Andy Dalton, it's one of those things where you never feel good about Andy Dalton, but you have to feel great about his weapon. So he may be here to stay this year.
It's kind of true. And it's like the weird part is like he was in my sell high column this week in my article. I do the fantasy stock market on PFF, and he was in my sell high just because I feel like Andy Dalton, he's completing 69% of his passes, 8 touchdowns, I think 1 interception. It's a weird year so far. And granted, he does have the weapons, but he's never put together a string of 4 consecutive good games in a row. It just hasn't happened. So I'm waiting for that little downfall. Will it happen this week? You know, we'll talk about that. And for those of you that are watching maybe on YouTube or the live stream, I have a hat on, and Kevin got on, and he was just like, Mike, why are you wearing a hat? And
I'm glad you addressed that, because we've got a lot of questions.
No, I did. I wanted to address it because I took my daughter to school, and then I got back. I had to do some errands. I had a hat on. I went to take it off to get ready for the show, and I had miserably. I had line across front of my head, so I was like, nope, it's staying on today. But moving on from hat, let's get into the games. We obviously have a lot to cover today. Starts tonight. Ravens at Steelers. Steve Smith has been going off in fantasy. Now, there's a whole bunch of split stats on him on whether or not you should sell him. Kevin, I'm interested in your take on this because he has racked up yardage over the past few years in the front half of the season, and then it seems like he fades as the year goes on. I mean, you got to figure teams are going to start bracketing him to the point where somebody else has got to beat him, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that, but I think people overestimate how easy it is to shut down one particular receiver. I think the only way you can really shut down a great receiver is if you have a great shutdown corner. Because if you try to scheme too much to just stop one guy, the rest of the offense is going to really open up. So I expect Steve Smith to still be strong. I mean, we're only into Week 4 now, so I know a lot of people have been pointing at that first half, second half split for him. We're only in Week 4, so I think he still has some strong production to come. What could happen later on this year is if Rashad Perryman ever gets better, which I don't even know if he actually even exists at this point. He might just be like, they might have just wasted a pick on a ghost there. So if he ever actually comes back, I could see that eating into his workload, but it's tough to point to another receiving core out there that has less talent surrounding their main guy than Baltimore. And you also look at the tight end position. I mean, you have Crockett Gilmore there who's been okay. He's injured. Now you have rookie Max Williams. Rookie tight ends are notoriously difficult to get integrated into the offense. So there really isn't anyone else to throw it to. So for the time being, I think I'd ride Steve Smith unless you feel like you have a great receivers around him. But I consider him a pretty top option almost week in, week out at this point.
Well, yeah, and it's hard not to. And the funny thing is that I own him in a couple leagues. I kind of picked him up as a third receiver based on volume. And I'm sitting there trying to decide who I'm going to trade him away for because I am going to trade him. It's just a matter of when. And I couldn't trade him this week going against the Steelers. I know it's a Thursday night game, and we typically tend to fade players on Thursday night, but I'm not going to trade him just yet. I'm gonna get at least another solid week out of him, and then maybe move him for maybe an RB2 that's struggling. Maybe I can get a Lamar Miller for him or a CJ Anderson. I would do that. That's what I'm going to shoot for after this week. I'm holding on one more week. I'm keeping my eggs in that basket. And Kevin touched on it there. Max Williams is going to be the starter. Crockett Gilmore's out for tonight's game. So Max Williams is going to get his opportunity. And I like him as a bottom end tight end 1. I'm streaming him in a couple leagues because it's on volume alone. Like you said, Steve Smith is, he's there. He's going to get his, 10 targets or whatever he's going to get. And the Steelers secondary is just pathetic. So I'm going to take Max Williams based on volume alone and think he's got to get at least 7-8 targets. So I like him. I actually do like the Ravens to win this game on the road, even though they've been struggling with Mike Vick kind of taking over for Ben Roethlisberger. But moving on to the next game, we're going to go into the Jets at the Dolphins. And if you guys don't know, this game is taking place in London. So if your lineup's set, if they lock as soon as that first game starts on Sunday, make sure you set your lineups in advance. If you're debating whether or not you should start Rashard Matthews, Jarvis Landry, whatever the case may be, you need to make that decision Saturday night, because last thing you want to do is wake up Sunday morning all razzled. But Kevin, I want your take on Ryan Tannehill this week. Do you think that he's a good play based on volume alone? Because I just don't see them be able to get the run game going. And when I was going through my projections, I had noticed that Ryan Tannehill kind of came up higher than I thought he would, just because I don't have much faith in the running game as of right now.
Yeah, I think he's a decent play. This is totally anecdotal, but I feel like those London games have been pretty wild over the course of the year. It's obviously there's a different travel schedule. There's people have trouble sleeping. There's all kinds of different things going on. So those games have been pretty wild. And I think that there could be some points scored in this one. The Jets defense has been very solid. I mean, we've seen that, although even Sam Bradford had some opportunities last week. He just doesn't look to push the ball down the field, and neither does Tannehill. So it could be interesting. I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to start Tannehill. If I had another viable option, I would probably go with that first. But the passing game is probably going to have to be where they're going to lean this year, and they've been extremely pass heavy. They've shown consistent. They've shown a consistent favoritism to the pass game this year and kind of abandoning the running game. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did it again this week.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on something real quick. I know a lot of people have been asking me on Twitter about Rashard Matthews and should they start him this week. I actually believe in him, not this week. I do believe in him going forward. His snaps are good, and I know a lot of people were worried about his snaps fading last week, but that was kind of in garbage time. Devontae Parker got put into the game. He saw more snaps, and people thought that's the emergence. I don't think we're there yet. I think Rashard Matthews is actually producing even more than Jarvis Landry, actually. He's doing really well, but this week I'm worried. If you guys are PFF Gold subscribers, you would know that Rashard Matthews lines up on the right of the formation over 40% of the time, which is Darrelle Revis's. That's kind of his home over there. I don't think that Revis is going to shadow anybody this game. I don't think that he would shadow Jarvis Landry. So I think Matthews is going to be lined up across from Revis, half the time this week. So I'm fading on him this week, but I do like him a little bit going forward. But that's one of those neat tools that we have at PFF if you guys do, subscribe to the Gold. But, moving on to the next game, this one is interesting because there's a player in here that I feel like is going to be in every single one of my lineups, as well as every one of my DFS lineups. It is the Giants at the Bills. And if you haven't heard, LaShawn McCoy is, I'm pretty sure it's a lock that he's out for this game. And honestly, it wouldn't shock me if they see Carlos Williams kind of go off and they're like, you know what, let's just give McCoy his time. Let's make sure he's right. Meanwhile, Carlos Williams has scored in every single game, despite, being behind McCoy. McCoy, his good performance last week was kind of inflated by his one catch for 10 yards. It was a touchdown. So people are looking at him like, okay, he's still good. He's not going to lose his job. I think Carlos Williams could turn this into a timeshare. What do you think? Yeah,
I think that he definitely brings a different skill set, or I should say at least a different prototype of running back. He's a big dude. But he's extremely fast. He can catch the ball. He can kind of do anything. So he's not just a guy that you bring in for your short yardage situations. He has that diverse skill set. So I think that makes him an extremely attractive option this week. And sometimes what you end up seeing is when the starter's out and the backup is the main option, they can really put up huge fantasy games, even if they're not extremely efficient, just because the volume is there, because they're not splitting. They're splitting with nobody, basically. They're going to split with the third and fourth string guys. So I think Carlos Williams is probably due for a huge game this week, although everyone loves him so much that it makes me a little bit nervous about it. But I think you have to just put him into your lineups if you have him.
Yeah, with how cheap he is, it's going to be tough to just for me to fade away from him. He's really cheap. Obviously, the Giants, we don't have Victor Cruz coming back. He's somebody that I have not had on any of my benches. I told people that I wouldn't have drafted him in the first place. We kind of see where it's headed. He re-aggravated his leg injury, and he's likely out this week again. So Ruben Randall steps up. A lot of people after last week, Kevin, I'm sure you've gotten the same thing. A lot of people have been all over it saying, is Ruben Randall, should I drop, legit receivers for him? And I'm like, no, don't do that. We've been down the Ruben Randall road before. And not to say he's not going to have games where, he catches 80 yards and a touchdown, but most of the time it's going to be that 4 catches, 50-yard performance. But he's just someone I stay away from. Meanwhile, Sammy Watkins likely out for this game as well. So Robert Woods, a deep sleeper. I think he could be a plug-and-play wide receiver 3 against the Giants. If you're looking for someone just to stream, like if, say, Julian Edelman's out and you need a starting wide receiver to, throw in your lineup, Robert Woods is usually out there and available. Would you tend to agree with me on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I like Robert Woods. I think there's just not enough volume to go around in that offense, especially after they brought in Percy Harvin this year. So he could be interesting. I guess the only downside to starting anyone in the Bills passing game, maybe other than Tyrod Taylor, because he should be efficient, and there's a huge point spread. So they could just sit on the ball and grind it out. They're a 6-point favorite, but they're supposed to score 27 points according to the point spread here. So that's a pretty big amount. So I like Robert Woods as a good guy to pick up. Obviously, some people will be on Percy Harvin, but I think Woods is maybe even a little bit better as far as being a traditional wide receiver.
He might see more targets because he is that more traditional receiver, and I do like Robert Woods' talent as well. But moving on to the next game, we're going to go into the Panthers at the Buccaneers. I know the Panthers are talking about getting Jonathan Stewart more involved. He's been very weak to this point. Honestly, considering the game scripts that they've had, the matchups they've had, Jonathan Stewart has been a disappointment. They keep talking about it. They keep wanting to feed him the ball. Eventually, it's going to happen. This week could be that week, and if you've stuck with him this long, you're going to stick with him again against the Buccaneers. But the funny part to me is everybody last week was complaining about Mike Evans and, the fact that he didn't have a catch. Well, he got targeted 17 times last week. This is not going to keep going. I can't imagine that Jameis Winston likes Mike Evans that much where he feels like he has to target him. I think it's going to even out a little bit this week, and I think you're going to see a Josh Norman kind of lining up across from Mike Evans quite a bit. Do you think Bjex is in for a bounce back, or do you think that Evans is legit as a, that low-end wide receiver 1 that people were drafting him as?
I like Evans only because Austin Seferian-Jenkins is out. I wasn't very high on Evans coming into this year because of the fact that they were going to have quite a few different options in the passing game. I mean, I liked him, but I just didn't think I wasn't as high as him as some others are. Now with Seferian-Jenkins out, there's going to be some more targets coming his direction. I think he'll still be heavily targeted. I mean, one thing about Winston is he's not risk averse. So some may say that he's just too risky, basically, and that may be true also. But what it helps is if you're an Evans owner and if he's getting shadowish sort of coverage, is getting a lot of coverage from Norman. You can see Winston just continue to chuck the ball down to him and downfield. I mean, I like Bjex. I think he's decent, but he's kind of been on decline for a while now. So I would still definitely start Evans over Bjex this week.
I would too, just based on the fact that he's seen that volume. And a fun stat I found when looking through the numbers is Mike Evans has had 20 targets this year so far now. He's already had 3 drops. So, if you're a rookie and you're looking to your receivers to bail you out sometimes, Jameis Winston, we know he's not the most accurate quarterback. I don't know if he starts losing faith, but I think Bjex is being a little bit undervalued right now in fantasy leagues. I think people are like, Evans is back. Bjex is kind of, in the background. But targeting Bjex 9 times, he's targeted him 19 times, 9 catches, no interceptions when throwing to him, and 1 touchdown. So I do like Evans a little bit more based on volume, but I wouldn't be surprised if Bjex had a bigger game. It really wouldn't shock me at all. But moving to the next game, the Raiders at the Bears. Now, the Bears are awful. They have a fire sale. They just traded away Jared Allen. They got rid of John Bostic. Reportedly, Matt Forte is on the trading block. It'd be an interesting development. I mean, I don't know if everybody is still clamoring for the Cowboys to sign a running back, but Matt Forte is apparently out there available for sale. But the play that everybody has been asking me about this week, Kevin, is Derek Carr. Derek Carr is available, pretty much on every single waiver wire. I don't know if you haven't picked him up already. Someone in your league likely has. But are you going to start Derek Carr if you have, say, Peyton Manning or Carson Palmer?
No way.
No,
I mean,
no.
no, I would not do that. I mean, first of all, they're a 3-point favorite. They're on the road. If they were overwhelmed, if they were more of if they're playing the Bears at home and we knew for 100% certain that Jimmy Clausen was going to be the quarterback, I mean, I think Cutler got in a limited practice. He could be back. I mean, I think Derek Carr's had a couple of good games, but let's see who he's done it against. I mean, the Ravens defense, they look legit week one, and something happened when Suggs tore his Achilles. Something happened to that defense. They're not getting any pressure on the quarterback. I mean, you saw what Andy Dalton did to him last week. He really had his way with them last week afterwards. And then, they haven't had the toughest matchups for Derek Carr. I mean, he came back against Cleveland. Cleveland's kind of been hemorrhaging a bit on defense, too. They haven't been nearly as strong as you would think. I mean, I agree that Amari Cooper is a guy that gives them a really solid option. They have a great running game. But I'm not going to start Carr over other kind of established quarterbacks unless, I'd start him over lesser guys maybe, but not guys in that have been in that top tier for a while. I know that Palmer hasn't been, but the way that offense is running right now, I think you've got to continue to ride him.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying that, and it'd be hard for me to do something like that. But honestly, I would start Derek Carr over Carson Palmer this week. And I know that a lot of people are going to hate that take and they're going to say, well, you're wrong and this and that. But here's the thing. The Rams are so much better than people think. Now, I understand this game's in Arizona, which helps fade it a little bit more towards Palmer. But the risk involved with Palmer this week, the Rams have only allowed 2 passing touchdowns. I mean, I know they played Kirk Cousins, but he's one of those touchdowns. They played Russell Wilson, 251 yards passing, and then they played Roethlisberger last week. Now, I know he was hurt, but even up to the point where he got hurt, Roethlisberger wasn't doing anything against this defense. They get pressure. Arizona's offensive line isn't the greatest thing in the world. So, I mean, I do worry about Palmer this week, obviously, which is why I'm talking about Derek Carr and the fact that against the Bears, I just think he's a lock for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't think that you could say the same thing about Carson Palmer this week. That's kind of my stance. Obviously, Derek Carr's a fine start. We know that. He's a fine start against the Bears. He's got 2 competent receivers, and the Bears don't have any corners to hang with those. So, obviously, Kevin and I are in a little bit of disagreements there, but we're going to see how that plays out. That's the best part about fantasy football is that we get to see how it plays out at year's end. But the next game, moving on, is we were just talking about it. Andy Dalton is going to be at home versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs just lost Marcus Peters for the year. Fortunately enough for their secondary, they do get Sean Smith back this week from suspension. He was suspended for the first 3 weeks. It's that secondary didn't look very good against the Packers last week. Do you think Andy Dalton's going to continue his hot streak this week against the Chiefs? And do you think Alex Smith has any sort of bounce back in him?
Well, I mean, I think that Dalton should continue. I mean, everything's pointing in his favor. He's at home. They're favorite. The receivers are still there. The Chiefs defense hasn't shown itself to be particularly intimidating. So everything's aligned for Dalton to do well. I mean, Dalton, you can't be extremely confident in what he's going to do. I think there could be some bad picks, but at the same time, what they're doing this year with that offense, when they said that they were going to quote unquote open up Pandora's box this year a little bit more, and they've definitely done it. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing, Gio Bernard get so involved is because they like running a lot more shotgun this year, a lot more no huddle, a lot quicker pace, throwing the ball a lot more. So if they continue to do that, that's going to give you that volume. And it's kind of more similar to the type of volume and type of passing game that we saw back in 2013 when Andy Dalton was a top 5 quarterback. So I think he can continue it, and everything's aligned for him this week. Alex Smith is a little bit more of an interesting play. I don't love him this week. Last week he was able to put up some numbers in garbage time. He's been decent this year, and I think he's another guy, like if we talk about weapons, I mean, he does have Kelsey now being a full-time player at tight end. He has Jeremy Maclin. He has Jamal Charles in the backfield. So, he's got decent weapons. So I think he's somebody who's always in contention to put up a good week. But you're not going to get a huge performance out of Alex Smith almost any week.
Yeah, and since he's secondary is good enough to where I'm not debating Alex Smith this week. But like you said, Travis Kelce, man, every time I see the guy play, and we've seen him on national television the last 2 weeks, he looks really good. And I just wish that they would develop more plays for him. I know that they came up with that really interesting one, that shovel pass that he should have had for a touchdown against Green Bay. But it was just that weird thing, like he just dropped it. But he looks terrific after the catch. But my question is about Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard. Now, I know you said Bernard kind of fits it. Are you worried about Jeremy Hill? Like, would you trade for him at all right now? Because like, obviously you're buying him low, but you're still not going to be able to get him for dirt cheap. Are you just avoiding Jeremy Hill altogether right now?
I probably would. I mean, I think you might need a Gio Bernard injury to get at least some immediate value out of him. It's kind of tough to say why you're putting him in the lineup right now over some other different running back options, because at least you're going to get volume with the other guys. You don't really know what you're going to get with Hill right now, so it makes it very difficult. I mean, I think he's a great runner. I think he's a great talent. But like I said, this year they haven't decided they were just going to grind out games when they've been ahead. At least they didn't do that when they were in Oakland. So I don't know what the situation is as far as what the split's going to be going forward. But Bernard gives you a little bit more safety because of his involvement in the passing game. Agreed.
And their schedule coming up looks tough. And Gio Bernard, I don't think is going away. So Jeremy Hill is somebody, if you're going to trade for him, don't give away too much, because I don't see him as anything more than like an RB2, like a middling RB2. Moving on to the next game, the Houston Texans at the Atlanta Falcons. We may be another week away from the Arian Foster show. I know everybody's been waiting for it, and myself included. There's rumors that he's probably going to sit this week because he's been limited in practice the past couple of weeks, and they want him to be a full participant before they put him into games. While this is a really bad thing for the people that have been waiting for him, I think it's a really good thing, though, because when they do throw Foster in there, he's going to be 100% full go. Like, you're not going to have to worry about, are they going to ease him into the offense? No, I think they're waiting until he's 100%. They're going to thrust him in there. They're just going to say, here you go. But they're playing the Falcons this week. It would have been an ideal time to get him in your lineup and feel really, really good about it. But we're not going to talk too much about the Texans running back situation, because if Foster's not playing, we don't even know who's going to get the ball. But talking about the other side, we know that Julio Jones is a lock. We know that what I want to know from you, Kevin, is Devonta Freeman. Are you buying the fact that he's now head on the depth chart? Are you selling that? Or on the same offense, Roddy White, is he droppable, or is it just kind of like a weird thing where he just hasn't seen the targets the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think Roddy White is almost droppable. I mean, I might try to package him in with a trade for someone who might be a believer, or wait one more week, because he's already had 2 virtual goose eggs the last couple of weeks. So waiting one more week and having him put up another goose egg potentially, I mean, you're not going to start him, of course. And then dropping him is probably the way to go. But if he does something this week, then you could kind of throw those offers out there and see if anyone's a believer that he may be making a comeback. As far as Devonta Freeman, I mean, I don't like Freeman as a talent, but last week kind of showed you what volume can do and what can happen in a game where essentially defense was kind of optional in that game. People were just running all over the field on both sides and scoring at will. So I think he could put up another. I mean, there's no reason why he couldn't have another huge game here. They're playing on the turf. They're playing indoors. They're playing at home. They're 6.5 point favorites. The Texas defense has been, solid, but I don't think that it's a guarantee that they'll shut anyone down. And he's involved in the passing games. You have all those things going for him. It's kind of like when I talked earlier about Carlos Williams. Sometimes when you have a guy who's less talented potentially, or is the backup kind of a guy. I'm not saying Freeman was the backup to Coleman, but it was kind of trending in that direction. And then the lead guy goes down. The backup can actually do better because he just has so much more volume. So when you get that volume, that's when big fantasy weeks can come forward. So I wouldn't trade him going into this week. I think this would be a great time to trade him after this week, though.
Yeah, and the thing is, the Houston Texans front four is obviously as strong as any in the league. So I do worry about Freeman's prospects on the ground this week, but he is involved in the passing game. He doesn't really come off the field very much. I thought Ward would get involved a little bit more last week, and he really didn't. Devonta Freeman looked better than I have ever seen him run, but that doesn't change the fact that he's still, coming into that game for his career, averaged right around, 3.2 yards per carry. So he's not somebody that really excites me. But this week, like you said, he's a volume play. We know what he is. And in regards to Roddy White, most people think that he's just not playing as much and that he's kind of fallen behind Hankerson on the depth chart, which isn't really true. Roddy White's actually played the most snaps at wide receiver. He's played 9 more than Julio Jones. But the discerning thing is that He's seen 9 targets. He's caught 4 of them, and then 2 of them have been picked off. So it's kind of like an Andre Johnson thing where it's just, something's not working. Obviously, Julio Jones is going to take away some of the attention, but Roddy's not doing anything with it just yet. I think eventually things have got to even out. Julio Jones can't see, 20 targets a game forever. I don't think. But no, Roddy, I'm going to hold on to for another week or two and see if he gets out of that funk. But if not, he goes into Andre Johnson territory. So speaking of Andre Johnson, the segue, the Colts are hosting the Jaguars. And I was waiting for it to happen, Kevin. I don't know if you were waiting too. Whenever a quarterback that in people's eyes that they think he's so good that he can't possibly, play a few bad games, the guy's got to be injured, right? And now all of a sudden reports are out. Andrew Luck's throwing shoulder is hurt. Are you buying this?
I mean, maybe. I don't think it really matters that much. It was hard to notice anything about his throwing shoulder looking bad. I mean, I'm not going to say that Andrew Luck is a bad quarterback, but he's never shown the type of efficient passing that would put him in the league of someone like an Aaron Rodgers or a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady, or when Tom Brady's hot, or even a Drew Brees. So he's never been that type of quarterback. He's a guy who's had a lot of volume, and he's also gotten some points with his leg. So I think he's still the same guy. I just think that the offense hasn't been very good. The offensive line hasn't been very good. They got a good come from behind win last week, so that they can start to turn things around. I mean, one thing about that division and the schedule is it should be very soft this year. I mean, you're looking at a division where every team is 1-2 right now, so they're definitely still there in contention to still have a good schedule. So I think Andrew Luck will be able to turn things around. I mean, just be aware that he's not Aaron Rodgers. He's a guy who's going to get a lot of points based on volume and based on his legs.
Yeah, and you got to think about this. The fact that Andrew Luck, by the way, he had another pick when targeting Andre Johnson last week. That's now 3 interceptions when targeting Andre Johnson. Things have gotten really bad with him. He's starting to fall behind in snap counts. It's going to happen. He's falling off, and it's sad to watch a player that was as good as he was kind of fall off the way he has. But you got to think, would the Colts have been just better off just working with what they had, like just sitting there saying, we're not signing Andre Johnson. We're going to, we're going to roll with Moncrief, Dorsett, and Hilton, and maybe the offense would have been better. I don't know. It's hard to say, but Andrew Luck, the injury thing, I don't know. When I watch Luck now, he just looks like he's got really poor decision-making. He's always stood tall in the pocket. He never was really worried about pressure, and it's starting to come to life, and you're starting to see some bad decisions because of it. The last interception that he threw in Tennessee was just stupid. Like the game, you're trying to come back, and like man, I don't even want to get into it. It was frustrating because I had believed that he might bounce back, but his decision making right now is just god awful. But on the other side of the ball this week, Blake Bortles, call me nuts, but I'm probably going to have him a lot of DFS lineups this week. The Colts secondary they've been injured. They've looked horrible. You saw what Ryan Fitzpatrick was able to do to him. And now reports are coming out that Vontae Davis missed some practice. I don't know if it's lingering effects from this concussion. I have no idea what's going on because I was down on Allen Robinson, high on Allen Hurns, and now if Vontae Davis is out, I'm going to be high on everybody. Are you with me? Are you riding the Blake Bortles train this week?
Well, he's definitely going to get the volume this week. I think he could be a decent play. It's always tough to tell whether these guys are turning the corner or not. I mean, we have a whole season from Blake Bortles last year where, I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. He was horrible. Like, he was really bad. And that's also actually just to go back, Derek Carr was also pretty bad last year. So I guess that's why I wasn't necessarily as high on him. But Bortles had a few good games this year. He had a bad game against Carolina, which is expected. He had a good game against Miami, but I think Miami's almost proven itself to be one of the worst defenses out there. They get no pressure on the quarterback, which is surprising. And then he had a decent game against New England, but they were playing from so far behind the entire time that it's really difficult to see, and he was playing at home. So, Bortles is a guy in DFS, like you're mentioning. He's going to get volume so he can put up stats, and he could get you a lot of points, potentially playing from behind. But I think he has a very low floor in matchups where he's going to be an underdog. So I wouldn't put him into your weekly lineups. If you want to take a chance on a GPP, then go ahead, go for it. But he's going to be on the road and he's going to be behind.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you don't have to worry about the weather elements, but the fact that the Colts have allowed over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks to Ryan Fitzpatrick and Marcus Mariota, who I love, but I just think that that's a reason to believe in Bortles a little bit this week. And like you said, in redraft leagues, maybe not so much, but in tournament plays, I do like Bortles. I do like Allen Hurns, that connection, especially if Vontae Davis is playing. But the next game, we are going to move on to the Eagles at the Redskins. Is this game going to be able to be played? Isn't there a hurricane coming that way?
Yeah, that's what the word is. This is going to be really interesting because in some leagues, I mean, a lot of leagues that I'm in, if you play these different mid stakes or high stakes leagues, they don't have open waivers at any particular point. You can basically run your last waiver on Friday night and then you're done. So I don't know. This is going to be a very interesting situation to see if people have guys that they're hoping to start this week. And then they can't go all of a sudden. I don't know what the situation is going to be. You might need a backup plan if you're planning on starting, let's say, Jordan Reed at tight end or something like that.
Right, and that's the weird part is like I wanted to see Deshaun Jackson play against the Eagles again, and he's dirt cheap in a lot of DFS lineups, so I was hoping that he would play, but he's not. And I know last week we found out leading up to game time that DeMarco Murray was inactive. Ryan Matthews was going to get the start, and it's funny because I told people if Murray were to sit, I would like Matthews better than I liked Murray in my rankings. And they're like, well, what are you trying to say, that Matthews is better than DeMarco Murray? I'm like, well, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, but I'm going to tell you that it takes one of the three-headed monster out of the equation, and Matthews just might be a better fit for this system. I mean, I know a lot of people were saying that Matthews had a lot more room to run than DeMarco's had, but where are you at? Are you thinking that DeMarco Murray is going to retake the ahead of this timeshare, or do you think that Ryan Matthews has, bought himself some more time on the field?
Yeah, no, I think Matthews has definitely bought himself some more time on the field. I think what you saw the first couple of games is Matthews was virtually absent from the field. I mean, I think he got a touchdown in week 1 on barely any work. In week 2, he was kind of a total non-factor. So I think he's going to work his way in more. I mean, I don't think Chip Kelly feels obligated to give the ball to one guy versus another. I know some people in the offseason had pointed to the fact that DeMarco Murray had such a bigger contract than Matthews, but I don't think it really matters that much. I mean, they brought in and they paid good money for Matthews for a reason. I mean, they could have much just as easily just signed someone else to be a backup for the league minimum or something like that, or drafted a late rookie. So I think he'll get some work there. It's going to be difficult to tell who to start, though. I don't know if any of them are really startable, other than maybe Darren Sproles in a PPR league, because you just don't know who's going to get the ball there. But you do know that Sproles is going to be effective in catch and passes, because Sam Bradford does not throw the ball to his outside wide receivers. Basically, he just throws it to Jordan Matthews in the slot. He throws it to the tight end. He throws it to Ertz sometimes, and then he throws it to the running backs a lot. So I like Sproles in this in any week if you need to plug a guy in there and you don't have a top end running back.
Yeah, no, Sproles, he's somebody that I stuck into. I actually did a few lineups with Matthews and Sproles actually last week. I know people were calling me nuts for it, but it actually worked out. But
he dropped what could have been like an 80-yard a wheel route also, Sproles. So that would have been huge.
It would have been really nice. I had one DFS lineup that scored, I think it was 243 points. And the Millionaire Maker, like not this from week 2, 255 won the million. So I'm like, oh my God, my lineup did so well, but it was such a high scoring week in week 3 that the highest score I think that won the million in DraftKings was 301 points. That's insane. But it just reminds us, football is back. It really feels like the playoffs, thanks to 1 Week Fantasy at DraftKings.com. With millions being won each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday, like that Darren Sproles drop touchdown. This isn't just fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. Enter PFF for free entry now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com. I know there were a lot of people that I was talking with on Twitter that set lineups that scored 180 points and didn't win anything. Were you one of those people?
I didn't quite get up that high. I had I had a lot of Dion Lewis, which I really don't think was a bad play. I mean, he could have put up in an absolutely monster week if it wasn't for the fact that they got up so big and then they took him out. So I didn't have Devonta Freeman in there. I didn't have Joseph Randle. I didn't have a lot of guys. I didn't have Steve Smith. I didn't have a lot of those guys that were big. So I got close. I got close to that, but no, I came away with my pockets rabbit ears.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have those weeks. It happens, but you know what? We bounce back, and that's what happens. The further we get into the season, the more data we'll be able to dive into and dissect it and figure out the trends and give better advice. But moving on to the next game, the Browns at the Chargers. The Chargers have been on a little cold streak for a little bit now, and Phillip Rivers still completing a high percentage of his passes, but they're all at the line of scrimmage. I don't know when he's going to start taking shots downfield. I don't know if this is the week that it happens. But you got to figure that Joe Hayden is going to be, somewhat trying to follow around Keenan Allen this week. Does that leave Stevie Johnson to be played as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in this matchup?
I mean, I think it's possible, although I think the legend of Joe Hayden may kind of outweigh what his actual performance has been recently. He hasn't been the same type of guy that people have talked about, and I think that Keenan Allen's the type of guy who can get open against good coverage. So I wouldn't necessarily fade Allen for Stevie Johnson, but if you look at the target shares that they're getting this year, so just the percentage of team targets, Allen's up at 38%. And Stevie Johnson is down at 16%. So I expect those to converge somewhat. I mean, 38% is just too high. I mean, it's not going to be that high. There's only 5 players who had over 30% last year, and 38% would have led the league last year. So that's going to come down. So I expect those guys to converge a bit. And if the pricing, let's say on DFS, reflects kind of the performance we've seen so far this year, then I would definitely say that Stevie Johnson would be a value, and Keenan Allen's probably going to be overvalued.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, over the first 3 weeks, the Browns have allowed 5 touchdowns to receivers alone. That's from the Jets, the Titans, and the Raiders. So obviously, they're not, that deadly pass defense that people used to think that they would be with Joe Hayden. And like you said, Joe Hayden was taken advantage of last week by Amari Cooper, and I don't think it was willingly. But the Browns, that side of the ball, Travis Benjamin, he's on my sell high list. If you can get, a player for him, I would do it. And in an offense like that, you just can't rely on anything from Cleveland. I'm curious to see what happens. We saw it slowly shift to Duke Wilson last week. He actually saw some targets in the passing game. I don't know why he wasn't involved before, but Isaiah Crowell has been bad for a power back that we look at like he's supposed to be that Eddie Lacy type. Do you know he's broken just 1 tackle this year?
That's not good.
No, it's not good at all. You don't need the data scientist over here to tell you that that's not good. Isaiah Crowell, they have to start fading him out. And I actually have Duke Johnson ranked 1 spot higher in my rankings this week in standard leagues. So I think Duke Johnson could be a guy that turns into a flex play, better in PPR leagues if they continue to use him in the passing game. And you got to figure that the Browns are going to be down in this game. So I think Duke Johnson fits it better. I think he's a solid flex play this week.
Yeah, I think they could start using Duke more and more. It's interesting because coming into the year, they had a new offensive coordinator. They kind of talked about being Duke Johnson as someone they liked because they wanted to pass the ball out to the running backs. And then he didn't see a reception the first 2 weeks. So the fact that he got 6 last week is somewhat encouraging. But then again, they were playing behind quite a bit. But that should not change. So they're probably going to continue to play from behind, especially on the road in San Diego.
That's how I feel about it. Yes, they're definitely going to be behind a lot this year. And the thing is, I know that's why some people might say Travis Benjamin is legit. I'm just not buying it. The deep threats, the deep targets, it just can't keep up, guys. That's just all. I'm just saying, if you could sell high on Travis Benjamin, I would do it. The next game, I know a lot of people are going to hate on me for this one, but Adrian Peterson's not a top 10 guy for me this week. I know he ran like a madman last week, and even the week before. But this week, they're going to be headed to Denver to play the swarming Denver defense that doesn't seem to allow anything this year. I know what Jamal Charles did, but Jamal Charles is a different running back than Adrian Peterson. Like, understand that part of it. Adrian Peterson's that prototypical workhorse, that guy that is going to beat you in between the tackles, whereas Charles, he's a lightning bolt. But Adrian Peterson, not so much. Obviously, the Vikings wide receivers have been a disappointment up to now. Mike Wallace, Charles Johnson, they're going to be blanketed this week by Aqib Talib. You got Harris guarding the slot. So I don't know. I don't know what the Vikings receiver. I don't think you could really trust any of them. I think this could be a Kyle Rudolph type week where he kind of guards that middle of the field. What are you thinking about this Vikings offense this week? Do you think they're going to get anything going, or am I just overestimating Denver's defense?
No, I definitely do not think you're overestimating Denver's defense. I mean, Denver's defense is arguably the best defense in the NFL right now. And if you look at what they've been able to do, I mean, they just completely dismantled the Baltimore offense week one. And that's a Baltimore offense that's come back and has been pretty steady the last couple of weeks. And then they went into Kansas City and they went into Detroit and kind of did the same. And again, with Kansas City, I mean, they didn't look great in Green Bay, but they at least were able to put up some points, but they weren't able to really do anything against the Broncos. So I think Jamal Charles is one of those guys that defies everything because he's averaged over 5 yards per carry, I think almost every single season that he's been in the league. He just has amazing instincts, and he's extremely fast, and he's one of those guys who can perform well even against a great front, because as long as he has a little bit of a slice, he can make it happen. Now, Adrian Peterson's a guy who's done well his entire career against poor defenses. The problem is we're looking at a game where they're a 6.5-point underdog. They are they're over under, the team over under is 17.5 points, so it's pretty low. I think it's just going to be hard to see how you're going to put up a lot of production against the Broncos this week. It's possible. I mean, it's tough to bench Peterson if you have him in season long, but I definitely wouldn't be putting him in your DFS lineups.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed. It's, with the running back, the uncertainty at running back, you can't really bench Peterson. That just can't happen. But in DFS, fade him. Don't play Adrian Peterson this week against Denver. Obviously, Peyton Manning's starting to come around a little bit. Hopefully, that's going to help out CJ Anderson. We're not going to beat a dead horse. We've talked about CJ Anderson. We need this offense to start scoring more touchdowns is what we need. And hopefully, with Manning going towards, more of the shotgun, like his offense, hopefully we start to see CJ Anderson's totals coming in. And, I know Kubiak pressed it this week saying that they want to get him the ball. They need to get him the ball more. And that's telling. I don't think that's just coach speak. I think they really believe that he's the running back for their team. I think that Ronnie Hillman is more of a change of pace back. And this week is ideal for them to get that going against the Vikings. We know what Carlos Hyde did to them in week one. CJ Anderson, let's just hope and pray that he bounces back. He's just costing too many of my fantasy teams my season. But moving on to the Packers at the 49ers after Aaron Rodgers, and the Packers decimated the Chiefs on national television, although, the score was closer than it should have been. Rodgers heads to San Francisco. That's where he's from, and I'm sure he's going to try and put on a show. The 49ers are a pretty easy team to do it against. But Kevin, what the heck happened with Colin Kaepernick last week? Like, we know that he's not the best quarterback in the world, but what happened? I don't even know where to begin with Kaepernick. What happened last week?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched the game. I saw the highlights, or the lowlights, you could say, where they had those. It was pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know if I've seen 2 pick sixes on your first 2 pass attempts, right? So I don't know if I've seen that before. I mean, Geno Smith could probably best that later on this year. I mean, I think he's thrown like 3 picks in the first 5 attempts or something like that. So Geno's going to try for that. But I think what was really interesting about what you saw last week is that for Colin Kaepernick, and what makes his floor really scary is that they got down, obviously, mostly due to him. And then they just didn't throw the ball after that. I mean, when you're down in a game like that, you got to throw the ball to come back. I mean, I realized he looked horrible and it wasn't going well, but they only threw the ball 19 times. You got to throw the ball more often than that when you're getting killed like that. So I don't know if they're going to take the air out from under the ball too, and they're not going to look to pass it up. I don't know what they're going to do against Green Bay, because Green Bay could put up a lot of points in a hurry.
Well, if you want to go with the ultimate contrarian play this week, play Kaepernick against Green Bay. I know it's not the popular thing to do, but we obviously saw the floor last week. We know what that is. But the thing is Green Bay is a team that's going to put up some points. You know that that San Francisco's at home. Colin Kaepernick, Tom Sula is being asked now why Colin Kaepernick is the starting quarterback. Well, you have Blaine Gabbert behind him. That's why. I mean, obviously, we can get worse if you want. But the Packers aren't known to be a great secondary. Clinton Dix seems like he's going to be a solid player down the road. Shields, it's just there's no game changers in there that you're totally afraid of. And Kaepernick has played well against the Packers in the past, and their defensive scheme is still the same. So I think he's the ultimate contrarian play this week. I think you could throw him in a DFS lineup and he's going to be extremely cheap for you. And then you're able to build with the rest of your lineup. I like his rushing floor. His rushing floor seems to be like 30, 35 yards, and they're going to have to throw the ball more than 19 times. I think they realized that last week. Kaepernick, I think maybe he got a wake up call. Maybe it was just like, I'm not going to be in the NFL next year if I play like that again. And I do like playing players when their back's against the wall. I don't know, Kevin, do you take anything out of that when a player has his back against the wall when he feels that? Maybe that's just the competitor in me. And if I ever felt like that, like, do you believe in that stuff?
I mean, possibly. I guess the only thing is in the NFL, it's kind of a must win every single week. So I wouldn't overhype that. I think you just have to look and say what's happened to him so far. Week 1 against Minnesota, he played okay. He really didn't have to do much because they got a lead and they kind of pressed that lead. Against Pittsburgh, they were down huge, and then he was able to put up some big numbers as they came back, and he looked decent in doing so. But like I said, they were down again, and that was on the road. And they were down again big on the road last week, and obviously that was a disaster. So he hasn't had the most favorable situations. Perhaps playing from a little bit behind most of the game and being at home this week could kind of be a good combination to boost up his workload. And that Green Bay team, they're just so awesome at home that once they go on the road, obviously they're still going to be great. It's still going to be Aaron Rodgers, but there definitely is a chance for that they could keep it close. And if they could keep it close, Colin Kaepernick could definitely put up big numbers.
Right, and that's the thing. Green Bay playing on a short week, traveling cross country. I just think that the 49ers could do a better job in this game than most people are giving them credit for. Granted, I'm not a 49ers fan by any means. I thought they were going to be terrible. I thought they'd be lucky to win 3 games this year. But I think they'll keep it closer than people think this week is all. So, like I said, if you want to go against the grain in a tournament, go with Colin Kaepernick, maybe stack him with Torrey Smith. But the next game is pretty awful. There's not much coming out of it when it comes to St. Louis Rams. I know a lot of people talked about streaming Nick Foles last week. I don't know how you ever put your money on Nick Foles. Like, I could never do it. Did you put Nick Foles in any of your teams?
Oh, God, I did. It was bad. But, I'm trying to think if there are any positives in that game. Lance Kendricks did drop what could have been like a 50-yard touchdown. So they had that going for it. But, yeah, it was pretty bad. The game just had this – it just didn't feel right from the beginning of the game. You mentioned how – the defense is playing really well, and they are. But, it's interesting because Pittsburgh was able to move the ball pretty effectively when Ben Roethlisberger was in the game, but they just weren't able to put 6 on the board and get into the end zone. And then once Michael Vick got in the game, sometimes these things, it seem like they can be contagious, where good play leads to more good play, and then bad play leads to horrible play, leads to Foles versus Vick. So that's what we had last week.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a divisional game. The Rams know who the Cardinals are. They've played against the Bruce Arians offense before. I just don't feel like Arizona's offensive line is going to be able to give Carson Palmer the time that he's had, say against like the Bears or even the 49ers last week. But the real question to me about this game has to do with Andre Ellington, Chris Johnson, David Johnson. It's a mess. And Bruce Arians, I don't know if he knows how to do math, but he basically said that he wants Chris Johnson to get 15 to 20 touches. Well, he also said that, Ellington was going to get 20 touches and David Johnson's going to get some action. Like, how many plays does he think that they get a game?
Yeah, I don't know. That was a funny one. He's always been overestimated there, but I think it is interesting. I don't like Chris Johnson as a talent, but coaches just like certain guys sometimes, and it seems like he definitely prefers Johnson over the rookie. Chris Johnson over David Johnson. So I think David Johnson's kind of the odd man out, and it's really disappointing because it looks like even in the event of an Ellington injury, he won't necessarily have value going forward. I think there's an outside chance that Chris Johnson could end up being more of the lead back in this offense if they feel like he can sustain things on the ground. He's definitely someone who's been a workhorse in the past despite his small size. So we're going to end up seeing what's happening. I don't think Chris Johnson's a great value, but when you have games when they're 6.5 point favorites, it's possible that he could get the rock. He could actually fulfill some of those attempt targets that Arians is throwing out there.
Yeah, and to be fair, Chris Johnson looked pretty. Like I actually think he's looked better than he has in a couple of years. He's like running hard. He's broken a few tackles. He doesn't seem like he's walking up to the line of scrimmage again. Like, he actually does look better. Am I going to sit here and say that he should start over Andre Ellington? No. but it seems like they might want to do a timeshare between those two. And then David Johnson, like you said, is the odd man out. It's funny because even 2 weeks ago, people were asking me because I started to say stash Carlos Williams, stash him. And the question came up between Carlos Williams, Matt Jones, and David Johnson. I was like, well, I'm selling David Johnson. He's third on the depth chart once Ellington's healthy. And we're seeing that play out. He wasn't even number one even when Chris Johnson was, the starter. So it's a situation to avoid this week. I want to see how it plays out. I think they might want Ellington to go back to more of that 10 to 14 touchback that he was, a couple of years ago where he was the most effective. So like I said, if you have any of these guys, if you have any other options this week, I'd roll with them just because you just want to see how it plays out. You have no idea what Bruce Arians is going to do here. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. I mean, there are some leagues where I've even, if I needed to make a decision on to drop someone to pick up somebody like you're mentioning, Carlos Williams, or even I kind of like Thomas Rawls also as somebody who could get some work here. I feel like for the ceiling for David Johnson, unfortunately, is just kind of low right now. So I would. So he's a guy that's even borderline droppable at this point.
Yeah, no, if you can get anything for him in a trade, I'd probably do that. It's going to take 2 injuries for him to be an actual fantasy starter every week. So moving on to the Cowboys at the Saints, Joseph Randle turned into somebody that, I mean, first, I should say, he turned into the guy that people thought they were getting when they drafted. Like, what was it, his first 4 carries? I think his first 4 carries, he had 83 yards. And then he finished with like 17 carries for 87 yards. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Basically, he did all of his damage in the first, 2 minutes of the game, and then he did score again later on. But it was a ridiculous game. Now all of a sudden, he's being ranked as a top 8 running back in week 4. I'm not on board with that. I still think there's question marks. Apparently, Christine Michael's been getting some reps in practice with the ones. So I don't know if they're going to make him active this week. I've kind of given up a little bit on Christine Michael just because of the fact that this offense isn't going to score as much as we would like. They're not going to get to play, Atlanta's run defense every week. I mean, granted, they're playing the Saints this week, but are you going to start Joseph Randle this week?
I mean, if I have him, I'd probably start him. I don't really have him anywhere, but if I did have him, I would probably start him. Yeah, I mean, I know that there was kind of this inconsistent rushing last week, but at the same time, I think what happens is with Brandon Weeden in the game, if you watch that game, he was throwing to Lance Dunbar it was almost comical because he would just throw 5 yards downfield when they needed, 10 plus to get a first down. And it was like they almost had no chance of getting a first down, but he just continued to throw it to Dunbar and others out of the backfield. Terrence Williams, I'm not sure if he was even targeted. He didn't have a catch. So they weren't stretching the field at all. So I think it's pretty difficult, no matter how good your offensive line is, to be a productive running back if you have a quarterback who just does not threaten the defense at all.
No, I know what you mean. And that Terrence Williams not being targeted is a huge issue for me. And I had a friend tell me, he's like, well, Weeden wasn't that bad. I'm like, well, that's not true at all. He completed just 4 passes to non-running backs, tight ends. Like Cole Beasley caught all of his targets, like to wide receivers. So the Saints defense obviously is much better. Terrence Williams should bounce back a little bit. But like I said last week, Brandon Cooks should be, he should be that gadget type player with Drew Brees out. I think that they're going to try and find neat ways to get him the ball. And they kind of did. I don't think that he's the top 12 option that people were drafting him as, but as a top 25 wide receiver play, yeah, I don't think you can go wrong there because I think he's a guy that's going to touch the ball at least, 7 or 8 times a game. But the last game we're going to touch on, because we are running low on time here, is the Lions at the Seahawks. We know what the Seahawks did to the Bears last week, although the Seahawks offense didn't look like they were that good. Like I watched it. I'm from Chicago. I have that game on. I have other games on. But Russell Wilson didn't really impress me against the Bears defense. The Bears defense is soft. Obviously, Marshawn Lynch is a big issue this week. He's very questionable, and this is a Monday night game. So unless you have Thomas Rawls, are they able to just put Marshawn Lynch in their lineup, or do you just play it safe and go with someone else?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would probably play it safe and go with someone else just because I know that the word is that he's 50-50 to play. But this sounds pretty bad. I mean, number one, I feel like this is the year of the calf injury. I don't know how so many people have calf injuries, but it seems like it's calf and hamstring. You've heard both of them thrown around for Alshon Jeffrey. You've heard something similar with, Victor Cruz, and now you're hearing it with Marshawn Lynch. And what you're seeing with these types of injuries, as opposed to, someone has a sprained ankle, I think it's pretty, it's tough to play on and it can take a long time to heal. But it looks like the re-injury of these sorts of injuries is huge. And I just think it's tough to say we're going to throw Marshawn Lynch out there as a 10-point favorite at home when he re-injured himself last week, when Thomas Rawls came in and was extremely effective. He had over 100 yards rushing. So I think Rawls is going to play. I think he'll have a role no matter what ends up happening. And I don't know about Lynch. I would probably try to plug someone else in if you can.
Right. And that's the thing with these Monday night games. It's just really tough. And we don't even know if Lynch does play, if he's going to be 100%. Like, I don't think he's going to be 100%. My gut says that Marshawn Lynch plays. I just think that that's Lynch. I think that's what he does. I just don't think that he wants people to lead people on. I just think it's funny how he showed up late. Did they ever give a reason why Marshawn Lynch didn't come out onto the sideline until
I don't know.
It's just Marshawn Lynch. This is just what he does. But it's not someone I'm willing to take a big shot on. But the Lions offense has been sputtering. They don't look very good. And they're saying people seem to know their plays. And, well, it's about execution. And Matthew Stafford hasn't had much time. I don't think that's going to change against Seattle. Calvin Johnson, he lines up on the left side this year, over 50%, which is the opposite side of Richard Sherman. So he's going to see a lot of Kerry Williams. So I don't think Calvin Johnson's necessarily a sit like some people are saying he is. He's still going to see the volume. But I need to see Amir Abdullah be more involved. I'm sick of seeing Joique Bell run the ball. Like, he's got 20 carries for 22 yards this year. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And then the thing that's troubling with Abdullah is he's kind of getting squeezed on both sides, because when the team's been down and when they've been passing a lot, they've also had Theo Riddick in there. Theo Riddick has been really good, and as far as his PPR production has been very strong this year. So when Abdullah's not getting that receiving work, it really hurts. And actually, I forgot to mention this, but if you're a Lynch owner, you don't have Rawls. If you're in a PPR league and Theo Riddick is out there, maybe you want to even add him to your lineup, and then you can kind of make that decision on Monday night who you want to plug in there, because the Lions are a 10-point underdog on the road. They could be throwing it a lot late, and Riddick could get some cheap points.
That's actually a great point. I like that a lot, actually. So if you're not able to get Thomas Rawls, because I know he did go on a lot of waiver wires, I love that idea to grab Theo Riddick. And the sad part is, I think the Lions are using Theo Riddick like they should be using Amir Abdullah. Like you said, he's getting squeezed on both sides. I envisioned it to take on that Reggie Bush role. But the thing is, they're not using him in screens nearly enough. It seems like they're just not utilizing him the way that, the Lions in the past would have. I don't know what's going on, but it's just frustrating to say the least. But being in Seattle, it's going to be a rough game for them anyways. Kevin, do you have any parting thoughts? Anything you want to let everybody know before we get out of here for today?
Well, I mean, one of the parting thoughts is kind of just looking back on what happened last week, and it's kind of, we've hit this theme a lot, but just don't fade volume, especially at the running back position. So if you have some guys you may not think they're that talented, if they're going to be getting the rock a lot this week and their backup stepping in there, go ahead and plug them into your lineups.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Now, don't forget, guys, if you want to talk to us in between the time from now until next Thursday when we're back with the next podcast, make sure to follow us on Twitter. He is at Cole_Kev. I am at Mike Tagliere NFL. You guys can also subscribe to us on PFF Radio on iTunes, listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio, and watch the show on YouTube and Fantasy Sports Network. Will see me and my gray beard and my hat. And that's going to do it for us this week, guys. Until next time, lights out.